This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to rumble!
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. I'm Tony Pesta, and since we are officially at the quarter mark of the NBA season, I thought it would be the perfect time to start handing out some interim report cards so we can get a sense of where each player is in the semester, where they've excelled, where they maybe need to keep studying. And joining me for part one of this series is a special guest. I'm sure Cavs fans are already very familiar with him, but Danny Cunningham of Locked On Cavs, thank you for being here. How are you coping with the big break in the Cavs schedule here?
Dude, it has been, I'm not going to lie, it's been nice. I love basketball. I love getting to go to all of these games. I love just watching games every night, but also I'd be lying if I said it wasn't nice having a few nights off. The Cavs only playing twice in an 11-day stretch after playing, 17 games in 29 days to open up the season. I'm not going to complain about this little reprieve in the schedule as a result of the Cavs not advancing in the NBA Cup.
Yeah, as much as I wanted them in the NBA Cup, we were talking before we started recording. It's nice to catch a little bit of, get your breath, have an opportunity to zoom out and look at the full picture here rather than focusing on game to game. And so that's what we're going to do today. Make sure you guys are subscribed to Locked On Cavs. Go follow Danny on Twitter. Hit up his Substack. I'll have links in the description. Do all that because he's really one of the best in the business right now. But Danny, let's start with the player who I think all of us were hoping to see a bounce back season from, and that would be Darius Garland. What have you thought about Garland's season so far, and is it safe to say we're officially back?
Right. I've been really impressed with Darius. I think he's had the best start to a season in his career. If you look at in some of his counting stats aren't necessarily where they could be because the Cavs have blown out so many teams and his minutes per game are down. So I think it's worth looking at him and really a lot of guys on the Cavs through a per 36 metric because he's not playing like a full normal starters amount of minutes per game. And all those numbers are career best for him. I believe he's averaging right around 24, 25 points per 36 minutes. His turnovers are also at a career low, which has been really good. It turns out that you're better at basketball when you're at the weight you should be at, where, so much of the conversations that, oh, he lost 12 pounds. I've been told it was probably a little bit more than that. It was closer to 20 than it was 12 last year when he had that fractured jaw. So he's been awesome so far. The 3-point shooting has been terrific. Not just the fact that he's making, I think 43% of his shots, maybe 42 from beyond the arc, but then he's taking so many of them because I do think some of the frustration that people had with Garland through the first few years of his career is that he's a great shooter. He's one of the best shooters in basketball, but he's passing up a few too many open ones. And I think that has been something, Tony, that sort of disappeared from his game this year. Not saying that he never passes up an open shot, but it is happening far less frequently than it had before. And I think that's just a great sign for his game.
I'm really glad you brought up the per 36 numbers because I think this is true for a lot of Cavs players because they're not playing their usual amount of minutes because one, Kenny Atkinson has expanded the rotation, and two, they've just won a lot of games by a lot of points. It's easy to maybe think that players are playing below expectations, but as you mentioned, Garland's averaging career best per 36, 24 points, 7.7 assists, a career low 2.7 turnovers. All the while, he's shooting an effective field goal percentage of 58.2%, which is about 5% better than any other season he's had. So like you said, basically every metric, Garland is back, and you can argue even better than he's ever been. And that's not even counting the defense. Now, I know he ranks like really high on some of those weird tracking stats, like ball screen navigation, stuff like that. I don't know how much stock to put into those weird metrics, but to me, it does match the eye test that he's working so hard on that end of the floor. He's really, just to summarize, he's putting together the most complete season we've seen from him so far. So I got to go with an A+ for Darius. I think he's maturing into the player we all hope for. What would you grade him?
Yeah, I'd give him an A+ as well. I always look at what he was when he made his first All-Star team. And I've never thought of Darius Garland as somebody that is like a perennial All-Star, but I also have never looked at him as somebody that when we look at the scope of his career at the end, it would be weird if he only made one All-Star team. Like, I think he's a better player than just a single-time All-Star, especially with that All-Star game happening so early on in his career. You look at that year, he's been better in every facet across the board than he was during that All-Star season. And yeah, some of his numbers might have been a little bit higher because he was tasked with carrying a much higher load than what he is right now. But I think he's having the best year of his career, considering what he was last year. I don't know that there's a bigger difference amongst like established NBA players in what they were last year compared to this year. Darius has been one of the most impressive players on the Cavs, and I think one of the best stories in the NBA.
Absolutely. Again, just every metric you look at, whether it's defense, playing without the ball on offense, the shooting splits, everything is just great across the board. Darius is having an absolute monster comeback season, and I'm very happy because last year got a little rough and people were worried, but we're back. And hopefully he continues blazing forward because he could be an all-star this year. We'll have to see. But moving forward, now we're splitting up the core four across two different episodes. So stay tuned later this week. I'll have another guest on to help me talk about Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell. But today we have to talk about maybe the more divisive player. We need to talk about Jarrett Allen because today I asked Twitter to grade the Cavs core four. And Allen has by far been receiving the lowest grades. He's even had a few F grades, which I think that's a very big overreaction.
Harsh.
But Danny, how would you measure Allen's start to the year? Where would you grade him?
So I think he's been up and down. I would probably give Jarrett Allen like a B, somewhere in that range. The field goal percentage is great. I think he's second in the NBA in terms of finishing. His opportunities are certainly different than they were before. His field goal attempts are down. His points per game are down. And he has been somebody, I think, that probably more so than anyone else has had to sacrifice with Evan Mobley going on the offensive ascension that he's gone on. I think Jarrett has been a fine defender. I don't think that he's been like a defensive player of the year type candidate, but I think he's been okay on that end. I don't think he's played his best basketball. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that his role is very different. It's hard to go from somebody who, because of injuries last year, to Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. He was, I think, probably the second best player on the Cavs last year and probably the second most important player on the Cavs last year. And this year, he is at best fourth in both of those categories. And that could be a really difficult adjustment. I don't think he's been bad by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that we've not seen him play the best basketball either.
Yeah, I think you nailed that, especially the last couple weeks here. He hasn't played his best. Started the year off very strong, but the reality is, and this is what you said basically, look, the long-term vision of the core four to me was always going to result in Allen being the lowest rung on that ladder if it was going to work. Over the last two seasons, Allen was just so valuable and impactful because, one, Mobley was still coming along slowly. So he was kind of, in the hierarchy, he wasn't quite there yet. Garland had the horrific year last season. And so throughout those seasons, when you put them together, Allen, you could make the case, was the second most important member of the core four. But now we are seeing him finally take that back seat. He's playing the lowest usage rate of his career. Field goal attempts are down, minutes are down. And aside from a few lackluster games, he's still been the same defensive anchor. He played great against Nikola Jokic last week. He always gives you efficient scoring on the other end. So basically, to me, he's just playing the role that he was meant for with this team. I still think you need some adjustments along the way. For example, I think he could probably handle a little more offensive responsibility. He could be a little more aggressive with his touches, but overall, to me, it's a good thing that he's being eclipsed by Evan Mobley because that was always the hope. And so I'll probably give Allen a B plus, just slightly higher than even what I said on Twitter earlier today, just because he has been really good. The advanced analytics are really kind to him. And I think it's just a matter of he's learning how to take that back seat now and go back to being the fourth most important player on the team.
Right. So let me ask you this. Does it factor into your grade at all that the Cavs are at their best when somebody other than him is playing center? Because whenever, like, the lineups with Evan Mobley at center and that pairing with him and Donovan Mitchell have been so good for them. Does that matter to you as you think about Jarrett Allen's game?
I think if he's ever going to get to an A or higher, he's got to start crushing it when he's the lone big out there. Because we've seen last season where he was really good in those minutes. This year it hasn't. So there's, like I said, there's some adjustments that need to be made. He definitely needs to find some point in the game where he establishes himself, like Evan Mobley in those minutes where it's just him at center, he like understands that's his time to shine. There hasn't been really any games this year where it felt like Allen had decided, all right, it's my time to be really aggressive and start scoring or impacting the game the way we've seen in the past. So that's definitely the determining factor to how much better can he get. It's those minutes when he's at center alone.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at with this, because I think that those lineups, and maybe it's because he's playing with Darius Garland this year instead of playing with Donovan Mitchell in those 2-man pairings. But those have been the lineups that have left me just thinking, you know what, they're not necessarily, this is the space or this is the time when he should be maximizing things, and that hasn't happened frequently enough.
Yeah, if you're going to maximize his role, then that's kind of the idea of the two bigs is you can have both of them out there, or you can have one of them out there, and you're always going to get elite center play. And Allen hasn't been bad by any means, but there's certainly more. We've seen more from him already in his career, so you want to see him at least return to that. But that's a really important note to make. Okay, we're going to round out this episode by including a couple of bench players. I kind of chose two guys who I thought were worth talking about for this episode. I thought they were some of the more interesting guys, and I want to start with Caris LeVert because I think he often gets overlooked. Danny, how would you grade Caris LeVert's start to the season?
Man, I think he's been awesome. And I will say, Tony, admittedly, I'm higher on Caris LeVert, it feels like, than everybody. Like, I watch Caris LeVert play basketball, and I just think he's been fantastic for most of the time in Cleveland. I feel bad, too, because his role throughout his tenure here has fluctuated pretty severely. And this year, he's been kept in the same role the entire time. He's not started a game, I don't believe. He's not been bouncing back and forth between having certain responsibilities or not. I think Kenny Atkinson has really simplified his role for him. I think that has led to maybe not the best year of his career in terms of just like overall counting statistics, but it certainly has been the most efficient year of his career. And do I think that he can keep shooting the three-pointer at 48%? Probably not. It's probably going to come down a little bit, but he is a really good shooter. I think he's taking more efficient shots. Last year, and I actually wrote about this on my Substack earlier this week, but Caris's shot selection is so much different than it was previously, where he was somebody that had kind of, I think, been in the mid-range just a little bit too much, and maybe not been the most efficient guy there. In his per 36 numbers, he's taking fewer shots, but he is scoring just at the same clip. That's because last year, 17.4% of his looks were mid-range shots. This year, that number is all the way down to 6.1. He's taking more threes and he's getting more looks at the rim. That has led to him being a more efficient player while still being, I think, a pretty good defender. I can't give Caris LeVert anything lower than an A when he's shooting almost 50% from three-point range, even if his role isn't as big as somebody of his talent probably deserves. So I have to go A+ for him, man.
Hey, man, I think I'm going to be right there with you. And I'm someone who was, relatively low on LeVert entering the season. I was just starting to question his long-term fit with the team. But, man, the good version of Caris LeVert that we've been seeing is so helpful to this team. The shot selection that you mentioned is really important. I think under JB, and this is no shade to JB, but under JB, the Cavs played a very heliocentric offense with their two guards in the starting lineup. And when Caris LeVert was on the floor, it was kind of just passing that off to him and playing heliocentric, with LeVert being the main guy, running the system now. This year, rather than having LeVert try to run the system, he's more so just a part of the system. He's a part of the offense. And we aren't seeing those moments where he's, hijacking anything. He's just really being out there, playing without the ball, taking smart shots. And look, I know he's a tad too small to be considered a legit wing, but he's the closest thing they have to a wing outside of Dean Wade. His ability to handle the ball, create for himself, get others involved, all while being a switchable perimeter defender, it just makes him so good to have. And look, I know Ty Jerome gave us all a good run for our money, but LeVert to me is still comfortably the best bench player on the Cavs. You mentioned the efficiency. He's shooting 64% effective field goal percentage, which is 12% higher than his second best season. So he's going to get an A+ from me as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's not bad. He's been incredible, I think. And the one thing, we can bring up to plus minus, like raw plus minus tells a lot of the story, I think, with him. And it doesn't always, but he always makes a positive impact on the floor. According to Cleaning the Glass, when Caris LeVert's out there, the Cavs are a plus 18.1. in terms of net rating. That's really, really good, especially for a guy coming off the bench. There's not very many players that log as many minutes as him in the league that have numbers like that. And I don't think there's another bench player that even comes close to him. So it's hard for me to say anything other than an A+ for Caris.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. He's been great. I really don't even think we've had any bad Caris games yet. Like, it doesn't feel like there's been any games where he's been a train wreck. At worst, he's just been out there, which is a good way to, if you're getting a game like that from Caris, you'll take it over some of the disastrous performances he's had in the past. It's really just been consistently great to good for him, which is what you want from Caris LeVert in that 6-man role.
He only has 4 games shooting below 40% from the floor. And I think that's a really big deal because you mentioned, there can be some games where it doesn't go well for him. And he hasn't had those. Not to say he won't, because everyone is due to have a bad game at times, like George Niang going 1 of 13 in a game from the floor. Stuff like that's going to happen. It hasn't to Caris so far.
Yeah, and to that point, to wrap up our LeVert discussion, I think the fact that he is playing more in a system under Kenny Atkinson's offense, we probably won't see too many instances where Caris LeVert doesn't have it going, but he's still pressing the issue. He'll probably revert back to that getting others involved role, playing defense, or just, you get Ty Jerome in there. You get some of these other guys in there to play minutes in place of him if he's having a bad game. You don't have to over-rely on him anymore, which just lets that simplified role and just perfect results across the board. A+ for me. All right, now we're going to finish off with someone who, it brings me no joy to give this player the grade that I'm probably going to give them. But we'll start off by getting your thoughts first. Danny, what have you seen from Sam Merrill this season?
So it has been, I think the shooting has obviously been disappointing. He's shooting right around 35% from 3. I think it's 34.9 right now. He's been in a bit of a slump that is kind of reminiscent of a late season slump that he had last year, where he had like a 10-game stretch where he shot 30 or 29% from 3-point range. I do think he's done some other things well, defensively in particular. Like, one of my favorite things about this season has been other teams' star players finding out in real time that Sam Merrill is not just like some turnstile defensively, that he can actually move his feet a little bit and guard. And no one's ever going to go out there and confuse him with like Gary Payton or anything like that, but he can kind of hold his own on that end, which kind of props him up a little bit, because you're not getting the most out of Sam Merrill unless Sam Merrill is making shots. He still does have that gravity. I think he still is respected by opponents as a really good shooter. And I do think that has led to some good things offensively, particularly that 2-man game with Evan Mobley. But it's hard to feel great about Sam until he starts hitting shots at the clip I think we kind of all know he's capable of.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I'll start off by giving him credit where it's due. Simply just having Sam Merrill on the floor, to set screens, run around, cause distractions, it's very helpful. He has that reputation. Teams don't want to leave him open, so that really does help. And you hit on it. He also plays really hard on defense. He's not the greatest defender in the world. He's certainly limited, but he's 6'5", plays hard, gives a lot of effort. He's difficult to pick on. He's difficult to single out. And giving him credit for this too, he's made a couple of nice plays attacking closeouts. Not as many as you'd like, but he's had some moments where, a team closes out hard on him, puts the ball on the floor, makes a pass to someone, and it's a good thing. But he's not that great at it. He doesn't do it off the dribble consistently. And worst of all, like you said, he's only shooting 34% from the 3-point line, which is the main thing you need from him. Even if he's breaking even and all these other X factor things, if he's not hitting threes at the rate that you want, it's kind of hard to feel great about it. And, giving him credit again, 34% for a shooting slump, not bad, not too bad. You could get a lot worse than that in the NBA. But again, I'm going to need a little more from Merrill. I think if he continues playing like this, it'll be tough to see him being a mainstay in the rotation as we get closer towards playoff time. But what grade would you give him? Because I don't want to be too harsh. I'm between a couple spots.
Oh, you're making me do it. I'll probably give Sam.
You're the guest.
Listen, because the Cavs are so good, like I can't just come out here and give someone a failing grade. I'll probably give Sam a C+, because the shooting is what he's out there for. But even when he's not making shots at the clip that he feels he can make shots, and we certainly all believe he can make shots, he still is affecting the offense in positive ways by just having gravity that I don't know that any other off-ball player on this team has. Like Donovan Mitchell has that gravity, but he's an on-ball player. Same thing with Darius Garland. Sam has that type of gravity for somebody who doesn't need the basketball to have that type of gravity. I think that is inherently helpful. Defensively, I think he's solid, and I think that matters here. But when a guy that, and I don't want to pigeonhole him into being a three-point specialist, but a guy whose main job is to knock down threes, only shooting 34.9% from the floor, it's hard for me to go above a C+ here.
Okay, I'm going to be just slightly more negative. I'll give him a C-, just because I think that 3-point shooting has felt disappointing. The main thing is, to me, it almost feels worse than 34%, just because it seems like he can't hit the open ones. But obviously we know he's a great shooter. I'm not questioning the talent there. I wouldn't be surprised if he manages to go on a heater at some point soon and he gets that up to, closer to 40% by the end of the year. But if he isn't able to do that, it's kind of hard. That's his, again, he's not necessarily just a 3-point specialist, but that is his specialty. And you really want to see him start taking advantage of those looks and knocking down shots at the rate that we saw before. Because, man, it was a lot of fun. And that gravity you provide is a whole lot better when it starts, yielding results rather than just opening things up for other people.
Right. And the one thing that I think is interesting, so he missed time with that ankle injury, right? And then even before he missed a game, I believe he popped up on the injury report as questionable and played through it. Since then, his 3-point numbers have not been great. I think since he missed he missed 3 straight games, and then the game against New Orleans, he sat out with what was termed ankle injury management. So it was kind of a rest game for him on the second night of a back-to-back after playing in Boston. Since then, he's shooting just 32% from 3. So that's probably why that 34.5 or 35% from 3 feels closer to 30, because over the last 2.5 weeks, it has been closer to 30. Because at the start of the year, up until that ankle injury, he was right around 40%. So it's not as if he's been bad all year. He's just been in a game or in a slump that at this point has lasted 10 games, where over his last 10, he's shooting 29.6% from 3-point range. So and I just wonder how much of that is connected to the ankle injury.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the fact that he has been slumping recently, and you include like those 2 losses to Atlanta in there and stuff, like it probably makes it feel worse than it really is. The last thing I'll say about Sam, which I think is something to keep an eye on, and I think it's something that could potentially reap rewards, is the fact that despite being in this slump, Kenny Atkinson is stuck with him. He's still giving him, that same spot in the rotation. He's still getting out there every night. That can go a long way towards building a player's confidence. Because no matter who you are, best shooters in the world, you're going to go through slumps like this. Understanding that, okay, because this is a guy who was fighting for his NBA life a year ago. Now he's a legit NBA player. He's in the rotation. Even when he's not shooting the ball well, he's managing to impact the game in other ways. If his shot comes around, which I think we all believe it can, that could really pay off. The trust that Kenny has shown in him and the confidence, that could pay dividends. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on him throughout the year.
Right. I think Kenny Atkinson believes in him a lot. I think we've seen that from how much he plays, where his minutes are, I believe, at a career high for him. I'd be very surprised if they're not a career high. I don't have those numbers right in front of me. But Kenny believes in him a ton. And I think Kenny believes in him on both ends of the floor, because even think back to, when we're all trying to build out what Kenny Atkinson's rotation might look like before the season, and Sam missed some of that preseason with an injury. I don't remember what exactly the injury was, but you kind of thought, okay, is Sam going to be in the rotation to start the year? And he's like the 7th guy. So I do think that this coaching staff, Kenny Atkinson in particular, does have a ton of faith in Sam Merrill as a basketball player.
Yeah, and we're going to have to see if that faith pays off, because it's certainly a lot easier. Like, listen, if they had just put him on the bench after this stretch and then tried to revive him in February, it'd be a whole lot harder. But because they've rolled with him this whole time, you can see a path where Sam starts knocking down threes, and it's Merrill mania all over again, and we give him a much better grade by the end of this. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. I want to give a special thanks again to Danny for joining me. It was a lot of fun. Danny, tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky. I'm on the social media platforms I should be on. Check out Locked On Cavs anywhere you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, everywhere else. Also available on YouTube. Also, my Substack, The Inside Shot. That you can find that on my Twitter. It's where I write about the team just about every day, after every game, and some bigger picture stories as well.
Yeah, everyone, make sure you're following Danny on everything that he has. He's doing great work on Substack, Twitter, Locked On. Please go check him out. And while you're at it, make sure you're subscribed to this show. I'll be back later this week with a few more grades, but until then, go Cavs.